Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to our channel, and thanks for logging on. Today, we're discussing a transitional great from the 80s, when the status and stature of Rolex transitioned dramatically from upscale tool watches for professionals to that, yes, but also standard bearers of status and accomplishment in the world of wealth. And nothing was more emblematic of that in the dive watch segment than this Rolex Oyster Perpetual Submariner 16803 in stainless steel and yellow gold. This was from the original family of two-tone Submariners. You can see and you can purchase this 80s icon on our website. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you enjoy these videos, and please click on the card in the upper right hand corner of the screen at any time during this video to see our full sales listing for this watch with additional accessories included in the sale, high resolution images for your desktop, and naturally complete pricing details for this Rolex Oyster Perpetual Submariner 16803. So a combination of gold and steel, a dive watch with an upscale air about it. This is a watch that originally launched in 1983 as a model, the first of the two-tone subs. The model specifically seen here had a relatively short run between about 83 and 88. This watch features an early R serial number, so one of the very first of the alphanumerics, likely built in late 87 or early 1988. The watch wears like a classical 40mm Rolex Submariner. Pre-super case were from the era when Ghostbusters ruled the box office and greed was good generally. But back then, perhaps people had more genteel tastes because the watch is compact and wearable across a broad range of wrists. 40mm is the measurement, but it's quite compact from lug to lug as there are no solid end links. The timepiece measures a very tidy 47.9mm across the wrist. For those of you who do wish to accessorize with a strap, 20mm is the lug spacing, and 12.5mm in thickness is a very manageable girth for this watch. It will slide underneath a dress cuff, and it is most apropos for such sartorial occasions. The watch wears well with formal attire. Nevertheless, it is still an important technical milestone because this was part of that transitional era of Rolex Submariners in which 300-meter depth ratings and sapphire crystals, unidirectional bezels, and high beat movements came into play. Let's take a quicker look at this bracelet because a vintage Rolex bracelet is a big part of the sensory experience. You see it, you hear it, and you feel it. There's that signature Rolex rattle brought about by hollow end links and hollow center links. Now you can see that this one's actually in excellent condition as the amount of relative stretch or elongation due to thinning of the retaining pins within is quite minimal. This is an excellent example of the bracelet, and it is the reference 93153.18. It has an L code on it, so 1987 is the code for L, and what I mean by that is it's stamped L within the clasp. You can see all of the markings, maker's mark, reference number, the serial, quite intact on the inside, quite intact on the outside as the bracelet has been both minimally worn and minimally, if ever, refinished. Now on the underside you can see even then Rolex knew how to make a comfortable bracelet as there are plenty of gaps to aerate the wrist but also channels between the links to avoid pinching skin or pulling hair. We're back in the era of the stamped Oyster clasp, but as stated, this one is in excellent condition. Tolerances remain superb, and you can see it features the flip lock extension system in one of its earlier iterations to allow expansion over a diving suit or simply a thick winter coat. Now you can see that all of the marks, as well as the depth of the marks and the height of the coronet, beautifully intact on this clasp. This watch is in objectively good condition, not just for its age, but for any watch from this era. It's representative of what the factory would have produced. I would also say this is one of the best examples I've handled in that it appears to have the original bezel insert, original hands and dial, which all feature a matching and congruent tritium luminescent fade. The case itself I would rate as about, let's get as close as we can now, I would rate as about a 9 out of 10 in as much as a good deal of the original bevels on the lugs are still present, and this is usually the first feature of factory finish to fade on these older subs. You'll also note that the lugs themselves, when viewed end on end, are wonderfully even. They have the same shape and they have the same thickness, and at no point on this case is there any danger of the spring bars protruding through the flanks. The tool apertures are remarkably deep and even from side to side, so this case is highly intact. I'll also try to give you a sense of the bevel remaining on each side. There's a small amount of the original factory hand beveling on each lug. This watch is a survivor. This is a timepiece, if we can focus as much as possible, that is best observed in the light of day and in person, because frankly you need direct sunlight to fully activate this sunburst style dial. Let's take a look at the bezel first, however. Unidirectional rotating. You can see it has a aged luminescent pearl at the top that is faded like the rest of the tritium fittings of the watch. It's wonderfully intact with all of the color and definition of the bezel quite vivid, and the bezel itself still full. Yellow gold and blessed with a still crisp factory grade detent. This doesn't feel at all adulterated by congealed lubricants or the detrimental effects of age on the mechanism. You feel it, you hear it, the knurling is still deep on the edges, and you can still line it up, at least by day, with the minute hand to have an impromptu 0 to 60 or 60 to 0 countdown, 0 to 60 being the calibration of the bezel. So if you want to count down to something or count up to something, you simply align the pearl with the minute hand. I always find that this is preferable to a conventional chronograph, as it's easier to read a large radial scale and the minute hand at a glance. Now, of course, the watch features a full set of appliques. By the late 80s, we were well into the era of applied gold indices and matching gold hands on Rolex watches. The matte era was long gone, as was the nipple dial era. You can see all of the text on the dial is a golden gilt style, and the indices themselves have a beautiful tritium fade. This is the original tritium dial. There will not be a lume shot at the end of this video because I've already tested the watch, and the bezel, the dial, the hands, none of them glow. All are nicely matched, and they are matched in both patina and their total lack of luminescence. This is a vintage watch that has gone unadulterated over the better part of 3 decades. Now, the watch features a handsome and even patina that actually matches the dial better than the original tritium material would have, because it's faded to a sort of dull ecru that's handsome and consonant with the gold tones. You'll also note this is a 300-meter diver, and it can still be worn like a modern Rolex so that you can't see what's underneath. It was a bit of a revolution for the Rolex Submariner in the late 70s. Caliber 30-35. 27 joules, automatic winding, 45 to 48 hour power reserve. It was a high beat movement for the first time in a sub. So you had within this watch a 28,800 vibration per hour beat rate, hacking seconds, the quick set system, and of course this was the debut, the transitional subs, the debut of the quick set system, so you could rapidly cycle the date. You still get a precise movement, COSC certified Swiss chronometer, free sprung with a Breguet overcoil. Not a full balance bridge at this point, that wouldn't come until the 3135 of 1988, but you have all the modern standards in this watch, from the high beat rate to the modern power reserve, the 300-meter depth, the unidirectional rotating bezel, the quick set for the date, and a sapphire crystal rather than the thermoplastic used on previous generations. This watch has all of the standards, the screw-down crown, and of course, on the inside, the watch is all Rolex as well. Back in the day when almost no company made its own movements, Rolex made them as a rule for its divers. This is a watch that's handsome and redolent of its era, but it's also such a survivor that it plays well in our era. A borderline vintage watch at this point, 31 years old. The timepiece is getting ready to take its place amongst the pantheon of great vintage Rolex models, and certainly amongst the milestone Rolex models, as you can only be first once, and this was the beginning of the two-tone Rolex Submariners. A superbly preserved example. Dial, bezel, case, and bracelet. You can see and purchase this one on our website.